Welcome, everyone, to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. In Hebrew, our name is Abitchonistim. IDSF is a leading Israeli organization advocating for strong national security to defend Israel. Thank you to all of our viewers. Thank you to all of our supporters for tuning into this briefing so we can really bring you behind the headlines what is happening here in Israel. On yesterday's briefing, General Avivi spent a good amount of time talking about the Houthis in Yemen and their regular continued ballistic missile attacks on Israel. And I think we took it for granted that our audience overseas is aware of the fact that on an almost daily basis, the Houthis are sending ballistic missiles to Israel. But after the briefing, a whole bunch of people reached out and said, "Hey, Moshe, we didn't even realize that was happening. It hasn't made it into the international media, but it is absolutely happening." And on a regular basis, they're sending the ballistic missiles. And because of their trajectory and their altitude, they're sending off these warnings across large places, spaces here in Israel. And on an almost regular basis, in the evenings, in the middle of the night, 2 a.m., 4 a.m., we wake up from our beds, we go down into the bomb shelter. And I can tell you it happened even last night. And where I live in Beit Shemesh, there was actually a fall last night. 11 p.m., we all ran into the bomb shelters. And then around 11:15 or so, word went out that a very large missile fragment landed in a traffic circle not very far from my home here in Beit Shemesh, which is always just a reminder to us, because you run to the bomb shelter day after day after day. You sometimes wonder, like, why am I doing this? And then when you see that, no, a massive piece of metal landed just a few kilometers, if less, from your house, it's a good reminder to take these things seriously. So whether it's being reported in the international media or not, it's still happening. And it's like a joke almost. Are we going to get a full night of sleep tonight? Or are we going to have to wake up 2, 3, 4 in the morning in order to run to the bomb shelters? And it really is ongoing. So no one should think that the war is over. It's absolutely still going strong. Okay. Having said that, having clarified that there really is still ballistic missiles being shot by Yemen into Israel on a daily basis, I'm now very happy to be joined by my friend Danny Seaman, who is joined for the briefing. Danny, thank you so much for joining today.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Danny, our viewers very much appreciate your analysis and they get excited when you come on the briefing. And you're here today for a very special purpose because today is December 31st. It's the last day of 2024. And it's a good opportunity to kind of do a year in review, to look back on 2024. And it's been a very difficult year, but also a very powerful, triumphant year. And you're here today to kind of give us a year in review. So, Danny, the floor is yours.
Wow, I get the whole year to review. It's very clear that this has been an unusual, at least for Israel, but also internationally, an unusual year. First off, Happy New Year to those of you who mark this day and celebrate this day. To me, it's another day of the Gregorian calendar is changing, but for us, the New Year was in September. So, but we're all following the Gregorian calendar, and we look back at what exactly a year ago we were at the peak of the war that was started 2 months earlier, almost 3 months earlier, and I don't think any of us could have anticipated how we would see things at the end of this year. And just so many things happened, and so many things that we don't even, it's sort of like taking for granted the outcome of these things, but it could have been so very different. I was sort of reminded when I was looking into all the things that happened this year. So I know I'm on top of what happened. There were so many events that it reminded me of this. Those of you who follow science fiction, there was this series called Babylon 5, and every year they had a different opening. And after they had this huge war, the opening the year later was the year of fire, the year of destruction, the year we took back what was ours. It was the year of rebirth, the year of great sadness, the year of pain, and the year of joy. It was a new age. It was the end of history. And it's very interesting when I recall all of this, because it's very similar And it's a good thing we can laugh about this to a degree of what happened here. Now, I'll start with the fact that it's a year of pain, because obviously we still have, even though during the year you had the release of some of the hostages taken, unfortunately, some of them were killed in the attempts to release them. But also we've had over 200 and some of our soldiers who fell in battle over this year, trying to release them and trying to put an end to our enemies. And just last night, I was with my family, and a month after a friend of ours lost their son, kid who grew up with my own son and went to school with, and I remember him from being a little boy. And they had this event for gathering food for the needy. And it was amazing how many young people, both from his unit, from high school, from grade school, the neighbors, how everybody got together. And I think this embodies and is the symbol of what Israel has done, the real Israel in this past year, of how so many have risen to the occasion, especially our younger generation, that we couldn't have expected this. And I've said this, and a lot of people have mentioned how wonderful this generation has been, this generation that we were very quick to ridicule with the TikTok generation, etc., and to see how they've risen to be a generation of Jewish people that very much encounter. We're in the middle of Hanukkah right now, so happy Hanukkah to us all. But they do symbolize this new generation of Maccabean Jews, and this young generation fighting and putting off the worst of our enemies since the time of the Maccabees, certainly the Romans, etc. So we can be very proud of this. And this year we saw this happening, but it's not only with that, it's also our society have come together, and our society have risen to this occasion and helping each other out and standing strong. A year ago, nobody would have believed that we would be in this war for a whole year. Not that being in war is a good thing, but for too long, there was this expectation that Israel couldn't last in a war longer than a month. Israel could, and our enemies believed that. And a society in war for so long, and as you just mentioned, taking on these missiles, and you said, it sounds like a joke that we can't sleep at night. Yes, we've been able to also instill our Jewish humor, if you want to call it that, even in this most difficult of circumstances. And because at the end of the day, yes, these missiles put us, we have to get up in the middle of the night, and you have to take the precautions that it's not really that dangerous for us. They fire these missiles, but we've developed the capabilities of intercepting them. Sometimes they get through, and sometimes you have casualties. But all in all, considering what we thought and expected last year from the Iranian threat, the Syrian threat, the Houthi threat, this whole conglomerate of elements that were built up by the Iranians, and within 1 year, but actually within several months, we were able to take them all out. So I think you have a combination of the Jewish spirit, and it's embodied in its finest in our youth and in the people in the state of Israel, and the enemies who we found out to have been less capable than they said themselves to be. Now, if we take a year ago, I was watching on YouTube yesterday. Who did we lose this year? And they were talking about actors and politicians and sports people, and these are the people we lost this year. Let's look at some of the people we lost this year, not us as the Israelis, but those who amdu aleinu lechalotenu, those who stand above us to try to destroy us. Sinwar's not here anymore. The head of Hezbollah isn't here anymore. I'm looking through all the names of the heads of Hezbollah and the heads of Hamas who were taken out by Israel in this past year, but also their capabilities were taken out. The Hezbollah threatened Israel with tens of thousands of missiles. And if we look back at this time a year ago, there were those who were saying, we have to be very careful. We can't go, though the Hezbollah were already firing missiles at us, and we had to remove nearly 100,000 Israelis from their homes, and still haven't gone back, but out of the concern of what they're capable of doing. So a year ago, yeah, we still had these concerns. We still had, but then over the past year, we took out all the threats to Israel beyond anything that they could have believed. And we restored the ability of Israel, the deterrence of the Jewish people and the state of Israel against our worst enemies. For quite a few months between January, April, May, a lot of people were talking about, oh, why isn't Israel doing anything in Lebanon? And by September, we found out, when we finally did enter Lebanon, we found out that Israel had been operating there very quietly throughout the period of time between January and when we finally moved in there, taking out stage by stage the abilities of Hezbollah. All this time also dismantling the abilities of Hamas. People have to understand how embedded they were in the Gazan civilian areas. Up until this point, we still have not been able to eliminate. They still fire every few days, and I think just yesterday they fired also missiles at the area around Gaza, meaning they still have these capabilities. Not the threat that it was before, but because we were able to dismantle this over the past year. But this takes a lot of work, a lot of effort, and also doing things that we get criticized by the international community, because they're willing to turn a blind eye to the violations of humanitarian laws of the Hamas and by terrorists, by putting themselves in schools, by setting themselves up in hospitals, by setting themselves up in the civilian areas, even the areas that we open up for the Arab civilians in Gaza to take refuge in. They set them up inside those areas, put weapons in there, and fire from with these areas into Israel, which, by the way, according to the international law that is so quickly waved against Israel, that turns these places into legitimate targets. And the moment our civilians, and our first responsibility, and any country's first responsibility, is to its own civilians. No country in the history of humankind have been responsible for the civilians of the enemy, especially when those areas are being used to attack your own civilians. But throughout history, we've learned that there are laws that exist and laws the way they are applied to Jews, and the same things are happening today. So in this way, nothing has changed throughout history. Now it's only being exposed once again that the way the Jews are being treated differently than the rest of society. There's only one difference between now and the past 2,000 years. That now we have the ability, Jews have the ability to defend themselves, at least in the state of Israel. And when we said never again, this is what we meant. This is never, we will never be helpless and never be dependent on the international community to come to our aid, because they come to no one's aid. They're not aiding the Christians in Egypt. They're not aiding the Christians in Sudan. They're not aiding the Christians in Nigeria, just as they didn't aid the civilians in Syria that is being exposed right now, that to what degrees of horror and violations of human rights the Syrian regime has gone to by murdering tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. They don't even have the exact number yet. And yet the UN is silent. And even now, when the Houthis are violating, because we have no border with the Yemenites, and they're firing missiles, as you mentioned, against Israel, when this is brought to the attention of the United Nations, the Secretary General of the United Nations condemns the state of Israel for defending itself. So this is all nice, and this game is all very nice, but we don't care anymore. Our first responsibility to our own people, those same people who set out and abducted, murdered, burnt alive Jewish children, we're not going to allow them to do it again. And that's what we did over this past year. And I think the most brightest example of this, and this was finally confirmed on, I don't know why, of all the outlets, on 60 Minutes, on CBS, but they confirmed it just last week, that Israel was the one, as if we had any doubt about that Israel was the one who used this brilliant operation of the beepers and built it up over a decade to undermine and dismantle Hezbollah from within, and to a point where they just don't know anymore. And one of the things I think is very important at the end of this year, though we may have our doubts and we may have our criticisms of what is going on, those who listened to the Arabs before the 7th of October and knew what they were planning, because they never hid it. Now we're listening to the Arabs again, and they're the ones now who are questioning, why did they find it necessary to attack Israel? Was it smart for them to attack Israel? That everything that has befallen them in the past year is their own responsibility and the responsibility of the extremists in their society, such as the Hezbollah, such as Hamas, such as the Iranians, who brought this death and destruction upon them, because they found it necessary and believed that they had the ability to destroy Israel. And I think this is the greatest message that is resounding around the world right now, that you do not mess with the state of Israel because there are consequences to it. Harsh and dire consequences. And I'm more than happy, and you see this on social media, the more you share the pictures of the destruction in Gaza. And I don't care what the international community has to say about it, and how much they play about it, over it, and how much they're criticizing Israel over it. It's a message, a clear message being received now by the enemies and those who destroy, who want and seek the destruction of the state of Israel, to remember there are consequences and they will pay a high price. And we should be sharing those pictures as much as possible, showing the damage, showing the destruction, showing the suffering on their side, because that is the language they understand. And that's what registers with them. If we want to have, there will never be peace in the Middle East. If we want to have an end to violence and the attempt of destroying and murdering Jews, they have to understand that this is the price that they will pay, and to never mess with us again. And this message was sounded this year and sent this year, and you no longer have the leaders of Hezbollah, no longer have the leaders of Hamas, no longer have the leaders of Syria, and I believe that very soon we will no longer have the leaders of Iran as well, those who've all sought the destruction of the state of Israel.
Thank you, Danny. There's a fantastic article in Israel Hayom that I'm going to share in the chat. And the article, they really go through month by month, a recap of what happened in that month throughout the year. If people are interested in really walking through the year and understanding every step of this war, both the heartbreaking moments and also the victorious moments. And Danny, in that article, they kind of end with this sense of optimism for what 2025 can bring. And I'm curious, I know you're not a prophet, but I'm curious if you have a sense of what the coming months are going to look like in terms of the continuation of this ceasefire with Hezbollah, in terms of a new president in the US, and in terms of Iran, in terms of the unity of the people of Israel as we move through 2025. Any thoughts to share?
I think that after 2024, I think we can be very optimistic and very look forward to this next year as a conclusion to everything that began in 2024. First off, there's been a tectonic shift in the Middle East. The 20th century has not been, 20th century has been concluded now, and we're moving on into the 21st century. That means that things that were determined and created in the 20th century, such as the Sykes-Picot Agreement or the European, they're very quick to talk about occupying forces and colonialism. Well, what you had in the Middle East was was a consequence of the European colonialism of the 19th and 20th centuries. So this has been brought to a conclusion. So, and this was done basically by the efforts of the state of Israel, and not backlash, but you had an earthquake. These are the way this earthquake is being felt around the region here. So I think this war will come to an end, certainly in Gaza, and to a degree in Lebanon. We will return to Lebanon until such point where the Lebanese people themselves understand that is their responsibility. And as long as they allow Hezbollah to dictate or to control Lebanon, there'll be consequences to pay for this. Also, that Israel is not the same Israel of the past 50 years, meaning that if there's an agreement signed, and if there are Europeans and Americans who are serving as the benefactors of this agreement, they have to understand if the agreement is violated, we will no longer bring our complaints to the UN or ask them to take care of this. No, we will take care of it ourselves, just as we're doing at the moment in Lebanon. We're taking out all those Hezbollah who have not gotten the message that life has changed. We're no longer allowing them to violate these agreements. We're taking care of it while it's happening, meaning they move into Lebanon, we'll take them out. Syria also, don't be fooled by the attempt the Taqiyya attempt by the leader of Syria, who's trying to impress the West that, oh, he's not a member of ISIS anymore. He wears a suit and he has a green tie and he's cut his beard. These are all part of the deception of extreme Islam, that we're not taking it anymore and we're not going to suffer this anymore. And we're going to make sure that they no longer serve, just as we did by taking out all the abilities of the Syrians to attack Israel in the future or these terrorist organizations. So these things are the changes that are happening, are part of what 2024 means for us in 2025. But more than that, there's no vacuum, and we can anticipate a Turkish involvement, and there's a Turkish bond with Egypt that we have to be very careful about and very weary about. And here, a message to the United States, and we're very fortunate now that as the new administration comes in and the people who are appointed there in this administration, that they are different, and they will no longer be supporting those elements who are first and foremost anti-West and anti the United States. Israel suffers the most from this because we're closest to them. But they see the United States as the great Satan. We're only the little Satan. So it has to be clear that the United States, who is the guarantor of the Camp David Accords, in which through the Camp David Accords, Israel withdrew from the Sinai. The Egyptians are violating that agreement. So the Americans, who guaranteed this in return for Israel withdrawal, that the Egyptians have to take out the forces and not continue with building up forces there, and certainly not sell them weapons, just as like with the Iranians, that the United States cannot continue supporting the Iranians. So what I anticipate in the next few weeks is that Israel will go back to fighting in Lebanon. Iran will be taken care of within the next few weeks and few months. And then we have to make sure that Turkey is controlled, because Turkey is a member of NATO, and not because they're criticizing Israel. No, because what they're saying, that they want to restore the greatness of the Ottoman Empire. They're saying it themselves. They're not hiding these things. So we have to be very aware that all these elements, what they say is what they intend to do. And we've learned our lesson the hard way. Make sure you don't learn your lessons the way that we did, unfortunately, back a year and 3 months ago.
Thank you, Danny. I want to ask you one final question, and then I'm going to let you go for the year, the Gregorian year, as you call it, as rightfully so. You know, you're a media expert, and we have spent a lot of time in these briefings discussing the relationship between the media and how it can directly impact Israel's operational successes and what they can do, you know, on the ground. And I'm curious to know, as the war drags on, and as this war in Israel is less and less potentially of a story in the U.S., you know, the genocide, quote unquote, being perpetrated in Gaza is less of a story. Do you think that will give Israel more leeway to operate and not to be as concerned about the international media? Or is the international media always going to be an issue? And moving into 2025, they'll always be able to dig up a story to hinder Israel's operations?
No, the media, as we know, I wrote a whole book about this, have failed at their responsibility in a Western civilization and Western societies, and they continue to do that. It's pathetic. Even this past week, when we took out these terrorists who were masquerading as journalists, first thing CNN and the New York Times and others did was present them as being these terrorists, as being journalists. Same thing happening in the hospital. Though the hospital has been taken over by terrorists, and we have all the evidence for this, they're all criticizing and condemning Israel about its assault on the last hospital, not saying anything about those abusing the sanctity of the hospital. And again, we cannot be more responsible for the Arabs than they are themselves. And the more that the Western society and the media continue to treat them as these imbeciles, that, oh, you can't expect more from them. Yes, if you want them to reach the standards of Western society, you have to hold them to those standards. And there are elements in Islamic society, in Muslim society, in Arab society, in Iranian society that want us to hold their countries to the standards of the West and not give in to these extremists. And we're failing them because we're trying to be self-righteous and causing and leading to the death of others. And it's not only the leaders of these countries, but it's also those elements in Western civilization who continue to rather be self-righteous than to be right. And sometimes you have to be tough, and you have to be demanding on these societies, not because white privilege, not because of Western civilization, but because we believe in just principles. If you want to call them Judeo-Christian values, these Judeo-Christian values, when done correctly, have a lot to offer to the world. And some people steer away from this. Unfortunately, those with Marxist ideology, even if they don't understand that they're promoting Marxist ideology. Don't be ashamed of Judeo-Christian values. Insist that the world follow these values, because these values are meant to make humanity better. And as long as we are not only forgiving, but excusing barbaric behavior on the part of our enemies, we're allowing this to continue to spread. So I'm hoping that in this new year, new Gregorian Christian year, the Christian civilization will be smart enough to understand how important the values that they got from Judaism are to be spreading around the world, to bringing humanity to a better place. And this is what we should all be thriving for in the upcoming year of 2025.
Amen. Danny Seaman, thank you so much. Thank you to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning into this briefing. We will not be having a briefing tomorrow and the next day. We're off for the final 2 days of Hanukkah. So please make sure to tune back into these briefings next week on Monday, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. here in Israel. Until then, stay safe, stay strong. Take care, everyone.